folks, Papa Boris here, reviewing the fourth game of the second Champions Cup. This is up against Collembola, a player rated over 500, so I was very, very intimidated in this game. My opponent went first, and choosing between the Acrobat and the Illusionist, chose the Acrobat, which is fine. The Illusionist is a really great character, but the problem is that as your first pick, it's a little bit underwhelming. There's not really much that you can do other than, you know, the usual put your leader here and then swap business. So I totally understand taking the Acrobat first. The Acrobat's also a top tier character, and I think I would have made the same choice. So that means for me as a second player, I get to take the Illusionist, and then I get to top deck, and I top deck a Royal Guard, which is pretty good. So it's a very lucky start for me. And the Royal Guard is replaced by the Manipulator, which is not that great. So I'm getting a little bit of the better end of the luck draw on this one. So my opponent moves the leader there and jumps up with the Acrobat. Then my opponent decides to grab the Rider, going for the mobility over the sort of trickiness of the Manipulator, which I think is fine. I would have probably picked the same thing. So on my turn, I have an interesting choice. I could do the thing with the leader swap here, or I could put my Royal Guard here and swap with the Royal Guard. Ultimately, I decide to go for the deep push with the Royal Guard, because that stops the Rider from advancing to its most natural square, so it helps me keep control of the center, or so I thought. I'm not 100% sure that's the correct play, but it's what I decided to do. And then, of course, I am going to swap with the leader in order to centralize my Illusionist. Now, I don't have to do that. You could just keep your leader here and either move your Illusionist somewhere else or just keep it. Maybe it's correct, because, I mean, I'm not getting checkmated here with my leader on this spot. I can always do this next time. But I decided, hey, let's just get a piece closer to the enemy leader, you know, approach this very caveman style. Now, on my turn, I don't get a super explosive piece, but I am happy to grab the Jailer. It does tamp down the Acrobat and the Rider. The Acrobat especially can help be really critical in some cases, stopping the Acrobat from jumping over a wall. And now my opponent gets really unlucky. The Rider wasn't really that great of a piece, and now my opponent gets a Protector or a Manipulator. And those are pretty sad choices with really good stuff still in the deck, like the Claw, the Bruiser, the Brewmaster even, and so on. So that was a pretty sad draw. I'm definitely getting a lot luckier than my opponent here. So my opponent puts the Acrobat in the middle, rides up with the Rider, tucks the King back behind my Royal Guard. This is perfectly normal, and then grabs a Manipulator along this axis, so it makes it a little bit harder for me in some cases to get through the center. But of course, I get ridiculously lucky, and I top deck the Claw Launcher. So now on my turn, I decided to actually swap with the Jailer. That was an advantage of putting my Jailer on that spot specifically, because now the Jailer is near the Acrobat, and I can also move him next to the Rider as well, stopping both pieces from being able to be active. And my Illusionist doesn't mind being on the back row. He's, you know, just sitting there minding his business and waiting for an opportunity to swap with something. I think it's also important here to put the Royal Guard there. This stops the Manipulator from moving the Jailer. So the opponent could have moved the Acrobat, for example, here, manipulated the Jailer somewhere, and then, or sorry, not there maybe, but maybe there, okay. And then the Rider could have ridden in here. It's not super amazing. I could still swap with the Rider, but the Rider then can move twice. I just didn't want to allow for any of that. The Royal Guard's not really doing anything, so I figured might as well stop the Manipulator from manipulating the Jailer. And I am a little cheeky here. I step up with the Rider, with my leader, because it's not getting checkmated here, and I do want to keep the leader centralized. I do think it's useful to have your leader be more centralized rather than less, all else being equal. And then, of course, I'm going to take the Claw Launcher. I put it here. My thinking is I don't really actually mind if the Manipulator manipulates it, because it's sort of going to be advancing it, and if the Manipulator doesn't manipulate it, I get to jump up an extra space. Potentially, that could be helpful. My opponent moves the Acrobat out of the way. I mean, not out of the way, just towards my leader. Same with the Rider. Technically, checkmate is being threatened here. And then my opponent does actually decide to manipulate my Royal Guard a little bit further away from his leader. He then puts the leader a little bit further away from all my pieces and grabs the Wanderer that just showed up. Actually, he chooses here. I'm not actually sure which place is better. I thought actually maybe this is more logical. It's just further away from my pieces. But this way, I guess you're closer to one of your existing pieces, so it's maybe a little bit easier to form walls. Now, I thought my opponent would take the Wanderer here. It is objectively, in a vacuum, the best piece, but I do think that this is not a bad play, the Protector. It may seem a little strange, because all it does is stops Illusionist swaps and Claw pulls, but Illusionist and Claw both still have uses other than that. But it kind of makes sense, because the Wanderer may be a little bit tough to use, since I got a much stronger team than my opponent. if the opponent's not able to maintain pressure on my leader, then it may be a little bit tricky for him to actually use the Wanderer and threaten checkmate with enough other pieces. So maybe this is a little passive taking the Protector, but I also see the logic behind it. So I step up with my Royal Guard there. This blocks the Manipulator along the diagonal, which I think is one of the best ways the Manipulator can be used. I then pull my Claw up, and it's a little bit weird because obviously my opponent could just like block this space and then move the Manipulator back, and then it's kind of like log jamming both of my pieces. But I figured that the Claw can come down this way at some point if needed, and the Royal Guard, you know, can always be summoned away. So I could always like summon away the Royal Guard somewhere and then just step up with the Claw, and then we'll start our little wall game. Now I swap with the Royal Guard to get my Illusionist closer to the leader. I figure it's a little bit aggressive and maybe not the best way to cash out the Illusionist, but you know what? It's one of those things where I can't swap with the enemy pieces, so I might as well just treat this as an attacking piece and then have my Royal Guard be the piece that like gets back in faster. I do need to, of course, attend to checkmate. I do it like this, and you know what? Oh, I had to move the Royal Guard, right? I had to move the Royal Guard first. That when I said I was blocking the Manipulator, and then I swapped with it, so I could not resummon the Royal Guard. It had already moved, but the goal of the Manipulator being blocked is still here, and the Manipulator actually can't get out, so it's a little bit weird. My opponent kind of has to do this, but it's really preventing the pieces from developing. All right, so my opponent moves the Acrobat and the Rider, so again, threatening checkmate, gets the leader out a little bit, gets the Protector out, and the Manipulator all make sense. And now, at this point, my leader is threatened, and I figured, you know what, let's swap with the Acrobat. That gets the Acrobat a bit out of the way. Yes, the Acrobat was tamped down by the Jailer, but I like having a piece in the center. It's nice having the center spot reserved. You're never too far away from the enemy leader. And it felt, even though the Acrobat could like jump back into play, potentially a lot more easier than other pieces, having a centralized Illusionist seemed really good there, plus it solved the checkmate problem. I move my leader further away from all the enemy pieces. I resummon the Royal Guard, get it as close as I can to the enemy leader, and I decide to also, I hesitate, but then I put the Royal Guard here. So from here, the Royal Guard can be manipulated, which I think is why I originally wanted to put it here. But from here, it is able to access this square if my opponent doesn't access it. And I thought that was important in order to be able to get to the enemy leader. I'm not actually 100% sure that this is actually a good spot. Oh, right. Maybe the other thing is it stops the Rider from going back and being defensive. But of course, the Manipulator can manipulate it, and then the Rider can still do that if my opponent wants that. I'm not 100% sure about the placement. I feel like either of these squares has a case to be made for it, and that's a pretty complicated thing for me to analyze. Now, I do decide to pull the Jailer up and then move with the Jailer in. So I'm trying to be as aggressive as possible while all of my opponent's pieces, except for the Rider, are super far from my leader. Now, at this point, what I was afraid of is this sort of strange looking move. I was afraid that my opponent would actually go back with the leader like this, which may seem odd, and then put the Protector back like this. That stops the Illusionist from swapping with the leader. And then the Manipulator can move here, which may seem a little odd, and I know it's a little bit tricky to visualize, but the idea is that, yes, my pieces can then get really close to the leader, but then my opponent can do this, where they can put the Manipulator here, put the Protector back here, and then stick their leader, actually keep the leader where it is, and stick the Acrobat here. Now, again, it's a little tough to visualize. I wish that you could move pieces around here, but the upshot is that basically in 2 turns, my opponent can get a Manipulator here, a Protector here, and an Acrobat here, and this is a wall. With the leader here, there is no way for me to touch the leader with 2 pieces. I can put a piece here, but that's it. There's no way for me to get a piece here, and then there's this breathing pocket here I can't suffocate. Now, there is a way I could try to beat the wall, which is I could try to put the Claw here and pull up the Acrobat, but then there's like, I still need to get another piece all the way in here, like it's like 4 turns away to try to get the opponent's leader touched. Now, maybe what I could have tried to do. Oh no, I can't. I'm sorry, I can't do that. Hold on, that's the whole point. That's the whole point of the thing. Right, the Protector is here, so the Manipulator and the Acrobat are here. They cannot be swapped with. They cannot be moved. This is a completely impenetrable wall. Unless I'm missing something, there is literally nothing I can do to break the wall. What I would have to do, right now I remember, I would need to actually get like an Illusionist or a Claw here to try to swap with the leader. because the protector is not touching the leader. But that takes 3 turns, which is an eternity in this game, which gives my opponent plenty of time to like shuffle the wall around and make it a little different. I mean, I'm not going to go into the specifics, but I mean, my opponent could like kind of slide everything over. I didn't calculate it super precisely, but if I was my opponent, that's probably what I would have done. And that's what I was pretty sure that my opponent would do. My opponent did take a protector pretty aggressively over a wanderer, which is a much more aggressive piece. And I'm sure that being 500 ELO, my opponent saw this possibility. Even if my opponent didn't see that specifically, he still could have made like a lighter wall like this, where, yeah, the acrobat is not touching the protector, so the acrobat could be yanked or clawed or something. But my opponent, maybe, I speculate, plays by an honor code where they do not make walls. So my opponent chose to do is just play kind of fair, get his leader away from my pieces, manipulate the royal guard, very cleverly, might I add. This is pretty smart, and make sure you pay attention to this positioning. See, my leader now can't move up, so I can't actually summon the royal guard here and touch his leader with it. And then the rider is blocking the other way that would have been available for my leader to get up and let the royal guard be summoned closer. He then puts the rider back, where it is still stopping my leader from going here and summoning the royal guard here. He needs the rider for defense, and he puts the acrobat back as well. So he's just kind of playing defensively, but he's not making a wall. Note that there's no swapping with the protector, with the illusionist, but what I decided to do here is just play kind of dumb. I just shove my pieces to his leader, and I put my jailer here so that I'm jailing the manipulator and the acrobat. So no jumping and no manipulating, and my illusionist and my royal guard are applying a lot of pressure. Now I step back with my leader so that I can get my claw into the game, otherwise it's doing absolutely nothing. This centralizes it. And now I pass the turn, and again, I was worried that my opponent was going to make a wall. There is an opportunity for a wall here. My opponent could just move the leader back and then ride back with the rider. This is a full wall, not one of those like walls that's open on one end with the leader poking out and only one piece can touch the leader. The leader is completely shielded by this. The only weak spot is this manipulator, which would need to be like illusionisted or clawed. And again, by the time I move my illusionist over or move my claw over to yoink this thing, it will take several turns and my opponent could try to reformulate the wall somehow. Remember that my opponent can also make the wall open-faced, so that like if he gets the protector near the manipulator, he can just keep the leader here and just let this be the one space that is open. So again, my opponent could have stalled the game pretty much indefinitely by making that wall, but he chose not to. He played it fair. He moved up the protector, just kind of made a sort of fair wall. This is another important pattern to recognize, this kind of V shape, one row off the base. It creates a sort of tunnel where the leader can maneuver behind it. And you can, of course, try to get pieces to plug the tunnel, but then the pieces that are forming the tunnel at any point can like zip back and make a wall. So it is one of those things where, again, I thought, okay, maybe my opponent's just setting up a different type of a wall here. Obviously, you'd want the protector to be the middle piece, not the acrobat, but, you know, it's still a wall, still a decent shape, but still fair. It's not totally impenetrable. And then my opponent does kind of move a little bit with the leader so that he maybe could still make a wall this way or just double back if I commit too much to try to come around the left side. So what to do here? Well, I decided to try to plug one end of the tunnel with my jailer and step back with my leader, move my illusionist this way, and the claw that way. The idea being that now I am threatening checkmate just by moving my royal guard and my illusionist. My opponent cannot stop. My opponent cannot put a piece here. So this would force my opponent's leader to go back the other way, and then with the jailer plugging the other end of the tunnel, maybe, you know, I could do something or other. Note you have to be a little bit careful not to lose the game here, because my opponent could actually put the protector here and the rider here and jump with the acrobat all the way here. So this is actually a really important spot for my leader to be. I literally lose the game if he's here or here instead. So I pass the turn, and I'm waiting to see, is my opponent going to form a wall? Because again, my opponent could. My opponent could put the leader here and put the manipulator there, and it is a wall. He would need the rider to block the claw from being able to yoink up the manipulator, but he can, again, make a pretty much impenetrable wall. With my claw and my illusionist, there's always like some angle to either pull a piece or pull the leader, but the number of turns it takes to get there basically means that the wall would be unbreachable. But my opponent seems to be playing by some kind of honor code. I really would be shocked someone would reach 500 elo and not be aware of walls. I mean, I just have to assume like one of the 10 best players in the game knows about this, but he doesn't make a wall. He re-maneuvers the protector and the acrobat in front of the leader, blocking my pieces, making a kind of fair wall, and then he does this. Now that's not an impenetrable wall. This is just normal wall. So I guess I'm using the term wall a little bit loosely as I make this video. There's like wall which is like a lowercase wall where you just have like a bunch of pieces in a line, and then there's like capital W wall where you're actually making a literally impenetrable fortress that your opponent cannot ever break. And this is usually reliant on either having the protector or on your opponent having a particular squad. In this case, with a claw and an illusionist that can pull enemy pieces, the protector becomes a very important feature of a capital W wall. So there's, okay, now my opponent repositions the rider that way. So we got a straight wall, kind of blocking out my pieces. And I think this is an important moment to think about what to do. There's nothing super flashy here, but what would be your game plan in this situation? So I think one thing that's important to recognize is that sometimes if your opponent's like putting up a static wall, then you don't have to do that much. If you just improve one piece, then that's fine. You can then tell your opponent, hey, what do you want to do? So right now, my worst piece, and probably the worst piece on the entire board, is the jailer, because it's far from the leader. It needs 2 spaces to reach the leader, and it's not really doing anything on this spot. So what I decided to do is say, hey, you know what? Let's just make the jailer better. Now the jailer's closer to the leader, and it's also touching 2 enemy pieces, so it's actually using its power. Move my leader a little bit out of the way. I know at the moment it cannot be manipulated, but I wanted it here. This is an important shape to be aware of when your opponent has an acrobat, this diamond, because this stops the acrobat from taking 2 jumps and then being adjacent to your leader at the end of them. I could have left the leader here, and the acrobat could have jumped here, and I could have been fine, but like, why allow that? It just makes it a lot easier to calculate, and then everything else is fine. I don't actually need to move my claw. I'm happy with my claw being on the cusp of this wall so it can dip around. And then if my opponent tries to block that, then he's going to have to create a hole somewhere for my Royal Guard or Illusionist to step through. So I just put my leader in a spot to stop the acrobat from doing the diamond jump, and I just make my jailer a better piece and I say, okay, opponent, what do you want to do? Because I've got a clear line to victory here. I move my claw over, and then the claw and the jailer do checkmate behind your wall. So, I mean, you have to do something about that at some point. What is that going to be? So my opponent decides to do is not cut off the claw. He actually puts the manipulator in the middle, and then he actually takes a jump with the acrobat. After stepping back with the leader and moving up with the protector, it's pretty clear that my opponent is just going for it. It's like he saw the writing on the wall, and instead of forming a capital W wall, which I think he still could have done, he just sends a bunch of pieces forward, and knowing that I will make an unstoppable checkmate threat, he's hoping to checkmate me first. And I respect it. I mean, I don't think it's super hard to block checkmate here, so pause if you'd like. If you're a newer player, how do you make sure you do not die on your next turn? Basically, you can be completely aggressive. You can just move up with the jailer and the illusionist and the Royal Guard. This is now an unstoppable checkmate situation. And all you have to do with your leader is put it here or here, and then put the claw where the leader was. There's a little bit of trickiness here. So if you try to, for example, hide your leader here, you lose because the acrobat jumps, does a diamond jump, and then you lose. And then the claw there does not protect the diamond jump because the manipulator here can offer a launching point. And then the acrobat can just jump here. And then it doesn't even need to do a diamond jump. It just jumps there. And then the rider and the acrobat are touching your leader. Also, you obviously can't put it here because the manipulator can suck you up to the acrobat. You could actually, I think, put the leader there and put the claw there like that. I mean, I think that actually technically works because the acrobat can touch your leader, but nothing else can. So yeah, I guess that's actually another way to be safe. So there's a few different ways that you could be totally safe from checkmate. So I decided to go for this. The acrobat has no way to jump near the leader. The manipulator has nothing to manipulate, and the rider is the only piece that can touch the leader. So my opponent just passed the turn and allowed checkmate. So it was interesting. My opponent, playing by an honor code, could have dragged this game out, could have forced a draw. I don't actually know how it works if in a tournament. If you end up in a draw situation, I guess you propose to abandon the game collectively, but I don't know how the collective abandoning works in a tournament, what effect that has on the tournament ultimately. But I respect my opponent for not doing that. That is definitely the weakest part of the game design of this board game, is the capital W walls. So I respect that he just played it, went for it when he saw that he was going to, be outmaneuvered, and just let the game actually end. Thanks for watching, everybody. Hope you enjoyed it. Please like and or subscribe, and I'll see you again soon. Take care.